for it.
Hi, and welcome to Soul Centered. My name is Ariella Halevi, and Soul Centered is a center for spirituality, meaning, and healing. And we really work, Baruch and I, my husband Baruch, and I work together with all people in the afternoon of life, really with midlife people that are really ready and open to look at what their life is in this afternoon of in this space of time, and how to connect in a very deep level. And what we offer is education and experiences like this. Well, this is an educational kind of a conversation, a soul conversation today. And you can join us tomorrow on Saturday at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And that's really more of what we call the soul experience. What we're going to talk about today, Baruch will introduce, but we're talking about this idea of legacy and how to leave a legacy. And Father's Day is coming up. So we're going to have this conversation that will lead into an experience tomorrow, and also the legacy experience, which is on Sunday, Mountain Time, 9 a.m., to really continue this conversation and experience, and also to dive deep into your heart and soul and remember your father and remember the things that have been passed down to us through generations. So I think start.
So it's informal. Again, Baruch Halevi, B, Rabbi B, any of those are fine. Really excited to be having a soul-centered conversation. We've mostly focused on experiences. Excuse me. And I think the way we differentiate the two is that conversation is a conversation, a little more talking heads. We'll have a conversation, but you'll join in. That's the great thing about social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Periscope, we're on YouTube. So chime in. We'd love to hear from you and you be a part of the conversation. And then again, the experience will happen tomorrow. And legacy is really such an important word. I focus on it heavily in my work, counseling people. I frame it as I counsel people through life, and part of life is loss, and part of life is also legacy. I think it's the other side of loss. It's almost called finding. You can even frame it as that. One is lost and one is found. You know, what is lost, but what is still remains. And so I work with people very specifically on receiving a legacy and being very mindful of what we receive in a legacy. Like, what are we receiving? Just because we're getting it doesn't mean we want it, doesn't mean it's ours to take. And it's not just physical things or financial legacy. It's emotional, it's spiritual. So receiving a legacy and also leaving a legacy, designing a legacy for those who come after us. I think we decided today we'll focus more on receiving. Tomorrow we'll focus on leaving. And Sunday we'll talk about fathers and the legacies we get from our fathers. But it may not work out so cleanly. So let's just begin with the definition of legacy. We say this word, it's a seemingly foreign word. It is a foreign word. It's Latin, at least it's foreign if you're an English speaker. Legacy, body of persons sent on a mission. It's from medieval Latin. So a body of persons was originally, it was a collective. And that'll actually be an interesting talking point to think about, what does it mean to have a collective legacy? Right? What happens when you get more than one person or generational legacy, which is an area of Ariella's passion. So that's part of the definition. It also, from Latin, legatus means ambassador, envoy, deputy. And so what does it mean to be an ambassador between generations? I think it's a really interesting idea that, we're ambassadors in between generations. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talks about being a link in a chain, right? And doing your part and being the link. And so thinking about a legacy as being the link between generations. And lastly, it is got religious connotations. Originally, it revolved around representatives of the Pope. And so moving beyond just legacy as a mental or a physical thing, but what does it mean on the spiritual level? And so lots of areas we can cover. Where do you want to start?
The wife gets to pick. So something that I do in a lot of with my clients is we work on healing. I work with midlife women to connect to their bodies and emotions and spirit to create holistic healing and to empower their lives. And so a big part of my work is to work with women to look at their root cause of their emotional, physical, and spiritual issues. And what typically comes down to it when we're doing readings, intuitive readings and guidance, is that we either go into past lives or into this generational trauma. And so if we look at receiving a legacy, it's a combination of those beautiful things that were handed down to us, all those traditions, the way that we maybe during Thanksgiving you do it a certain way, or you have to cook that sweet potato pie on Thanksgiving. It's because your grandmother and your great grandmother and your great 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 grandmother did it that way. And so some of those are some beautiful, beautiful traditions, and ways in which I always think of, there's certain ways that my mom had mannerisms. There was these certain qualities about my mom, and I see myself doing them, or the way she forgot everything and I forget everything. Like, there are those things that are passed down that are just very sweet and things that you want to treasure and hold on to. Like, you want to keep them in a box. And then there's this idea they go hand in hand. There's this idea of intergenerational trauma, and things that have passed down that are people aren't even aware of. Maybe they're a lot of Holocaust survivors are not able to discuss what happened to them, right? And so even though there's not a discussion of what happened to them and how it was passed down, the generations after feel trauma.
I mean, I think there's so much what you just said, but just even backing up one step before we go down, when we have to return to, so make a note, generational trauma. We live in a society where we revere kind of the Lone Ranger, right? Go it alone. Bootstrapping can come from the entrepreneurial world as well. You bootstrap it, means you do it yourself. And the truth is that's a bunch of crap, right? Nobody's bootstrapping. First of all, you wouldn't be here without at least two parents coming together, at least two people coming together for at least, I think Shmuley Boteach says 6.5 minutes, the average. Another conversation for another time. You wouldn't be here without that. You wouldn't be in any of your circumstances, positive or negative, without a lot of chefs in the kitchen. And so just challenging this assumption that we are a product of ourselves, positive and negative. I mean, we see it in the world around us right now, grappling with what did we inherit? What did we earn? And starting to think about that as part of legacy. Right. Not just from a genetics perspective, but, legacy back to the ambassador, like what was bestowed to us. And then coming back to what you're saying and deciding what we're going to keep. Right. And this is not mine to keep. I don't want it.
I do think it's really a choice. If you become
if you're conscious of it.
Yeah, it's just, are you married to me?
I don't think for long. I keep messing up.
You're not messing up. If you're conscious of it, that you have been passed down. I always think about integration. Like, you're passed down this hand, and this hand is sometimes a hard hand to feel, to experience, right? But then you're passed down this hand, and this hand is all of those, really good things. If you're conscious and aware of them, then you can integrate the both. You can integrate both of them together, and you can see it as, I was given a set of genetics of issues, and how then do I want to move forward with awareness to go through that?
And I think tomorrow we'll explore the awareness, the experience side of discernment, right? Of sitting in meditation, sitting and breathing as a pathway to really start to sift through that. That's not an easy task. I mean, this is what therapy, counseling, guidance is working with clients to help them start sifting through all the noise, all the assumptions. You can't know what you don't know. And part of our role, and when I'm working with a therapist or guide, their role is to be objective outside and help us start to see, did you even realize that there's a box around you? I was working with a client today who, my job was simply to help he'll understand that he had just drawn an artificial box around him based on his family's legacy, inheritance that he's taken on. He didn't even know he was in a box.
Right.
And so we worked on just shattering the box.
Right.
And that takes discernment. I come back to that word, kind of looking at it.
So true. I think about this idea that, like, I've worked with a lot of people, and I think you and I have dealt with some of this too. I think more me than you. This idea that something isn't right and it doesn't feel like yours. You know, something when you have a repeated pattern, or even if you think about your body and the genetic pathways of your body, and you feel like something was passed down. Like, for example, I have hypothyroid, right? It's passed down. My grandmother had it. My mother had it. I have it, and my daughter has it as well. And so think about that lineage. I don't know if my great grandmother had it. I don't know how long this goes down the road. But you know what's so interesting? If you think about the things that are passed down, and if let's just take hypothyroid for the example, like the energy of hypothyroid, or the spiritual lesson of a person with hypothyroid, is it's in the chakra of the throat. And the chakra of the throat chakra is all about speaking your truth. Why has it always been hard for, let's say, people with hypothyroid, of course, this is not across the board, to speak their truth? Now, that's generational. That's not necessarily trauma, but it's been impacting the women of my generations for years, of my family for years.
Sure, this is totally stupid compared to your high-level holy example, but every time I have my sandals off, one of my daughters says, "Hey, look, it's the Perlman toe," right? I don't know why. My dad's second toe, the long one, was longer than his big toe, and it seems like nothing, but every single time she says it, and I look down and I look at my sister's toe and I look at my brother's toe, I'm like, oh my God, that's the Perlman toe. But what it represents is we don't bootstrap it. It's not all us. We've inherited more than we've realized, whether it's a stupid toe or whether it's generational trauma and speaking your truth. Like, how much is ours and how much is not ours?
Right.
It's a fine line, because you can easily turn that into victimhood.
Right. I mean, it's consciousness, it's conscious awareness to figure out your root cause, what has been inherited. And then the question is, which is tomorrow's topic, is, okay, now where do you go from here? How do you leave your legacy? How do you move forward with that? You can say it's all my mom's fault. She gave me X, Y, and Z, which is what my daughter's doing right now. However, as I'm going to teach my daughter, is like, how do you want to go forward with that? How do you want to move forward with that? So that's really tomorrow's talk. But this idea that there is, especially with past life, like, we sometimes have stuck patterns of behavior and old beliefs and vows that we have made that we aren't even conscious of.
Or vows that aren't ours.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's not even out. You've inherited some vows that are yours.
Right.
Maybe it's the religion that you're born into and you feel like it's yours, but I meet many people who feel like it's not theirs. It was their parents. It's not mine.
Right.
Or, there's a 10,000, maybe here's an example. I counseled somebody not that long ago who was struggling because they went to college and they chose a professional life, but it wasn't theirs. It was their parents.
They're supposed to.
Right. They wanted to be a blue collar. They wanted to get a trade, and that speaks to them.
Right.
And they went a different path, and they inherited this legacy, but it wasn't theirs.
Right.
And it's really thinking about. So I'm going to read this quick quote. I love Abraham Joshua Heschel, especially on this topic. If you don't know Abraham Joshua Heschel, just an unbelievable visionary mystic of the previous century. So he says, the authentic individual is neither an end nor a beginning, but a link between ages, both memory and expectation. It goes on, but only he who is an heir is qualified to be a pioneer. But I love this idea of memory and expectation, right? Because it's like there's some of it, memory is liberating. When we talk to our kids, and I talk to them about Grandpa Shelley, really focused on Grandpa Shelley, my dad, because Father's Day is around the corner. I just wrote a blog on it. 5 ways to honor your dad who isn't physically here, but they're still here on Father's Day. I think it's so important to do this work on Father's Day or Mother's Day, which we did as well. because they're not here, but you're still their memory, right?
Yeah.
But it's a fine line because I wrote, I'm getting ready to give a talk next week on, I inherited some of what I want to keep of his and some I want to become a guardian of, but some of it is not mine.
Right.
I don't want it.
Right.
I let it go. I return it to the earth where his body is,
Right.
and I'll take the stuff of the soul.
I think it's really what you're saying is that you have to find compassion for yourself and for what you've gone through and what you've inherited and what you can release, and find that like sweet spot of compassion and discernment. You know?
Well, compassion is also, yeah, you're right. I mean, compassion is saying no.
Right.
I'm not taking this.
Right.
You know, I haven't been shy about it. I wrote a book on it, Spark Seekers. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother killed herself and my father killed himself. And I remember standing there saying, I'm not going to be a third generation.
Right.
I made a vow. This is not mine. I don't even think it was my dad's. I do think it was my grandma's not to kill herself, but to struggle in the way she did. My dad, I feel, took it on. I wouldn't take it on. It's not mine.
Right.
So you have to be very compassionate and say, no, this isn't mine. I love you so much.
Right.
I'm not walking this path.
Exactly.
Right. I'm choosing a different path and giving people permission. I mean, that's the work oftentimes I think we both do. Give permission to say no.
I think permission and forgiveness, you know, like if you think about, you know, the legacy that your dad and your grandmother left behind, that's a heavy legacy to carry. And I think it's about doing the best work that you can do in this lifetime to forgive. And if you can, if to release it, you know, forgiveness isn't for that person who died or for that person who did something to you.
It can be.
Yes, but a lot of what forgiveness is, I think about one of our rabbis used to say, like,
the debtor's prison.
Yes.
We've been married a long time. That'll go the same material.
Combo. The debtor's prison is that.
That rabbi is Rabbi Mordechai
Yes.
Finley, great man, great shul in Los Angeles or HaTorah.
Yes, never forget that lesson. When you don't forgive a person, you leave them in an internal jail inside of you. But the problem is that somebody has to guard the jail and be the key, you know, hold the keys to the jail. And
I tell stories way better than she does. I'm telling this one.
No,
You left out
so
the important
rude.
point. The important point is then you have to take
we
them
have
out.
a marital argument on Facebook Live.
Then you have to become the warden. You have to become the appeals committee, and you bring them out every now and again, and you reject them and send them back to prison. So this.
Okay, whatever. I never tell the story that way.
Oh, I always tell the story that way. But that's a full-time job.
Yes, it's a full-time
We're saying the
job.
same thing. I know we're saying the same thing, but the drama of it. So
We used to have conversations when we were first married. This is
we used to
why.
have a conversation when we were first married, period.
Well, that too, since we have 4 kids and we never have conversations anymore.
This is a conversation.
So when we were first married, this is why Soul Centered exists, because this is a side point. When we were first married, we've taken airplanes before, and like when we would have these big soul conversations. And we were waiting for a plane. We were in a restaurant in one of those bars waiting for one of our planes, and we just started having this kind of conversation.
And too many drinks.
That's so not true.
So we're at a bar.
Okay, stop. And we missed our flight because we were just so in depth and excited, and
We've missed a few off ramps as well.
we have many times on the 405 freeway in Los Angeles where we're just talking and talking and talking and talking about these things about the soul. And so 21 years later, we finally are doing what our soul path is together, is soul centered. So you're going to hear a lot of these conversations. And
so now my job is to bring her back to the point of this, which was the debtor's prison, which was we are exhausted by running this full-time jail, which is why we have forgiveness, right? Wayne Dyer says, love is forgiving. You give it. And so you give it as a way to release as much for yourself as for them, right? That's the point. But it's an important point because, thinking about legacy, and it's always, this word is always an assumption that we have to take it. Right? But we don't have to take it. We get to decide what's ours and what's not. And we get to forgive things that were given to us that maybe we shouldn't have, maybe they shouldn't have been given, and maybe we shouldn't have received. But now that we're old enough, in the afternoon of life, anybody who watches us is in the afternoon of life, is thinking a second time.
It's true.
Reviewing what they've inherited, what you've inherited, and deciding, is it yours? And then tomorrow we'll get into, is it yours to pass on?
Right.
right? Maybe you can't get rid of it, but you don't also have to pass it on.
Yeah, I will just say one more thing is that it's really interesting when I do I do a lot of past life work with clients that are interested in energy healing, and we go back into lifetimes and we can see some of the patterns that were passed down. And I've had a few clients that are able to really feel with the guidance, feel their loved ones and have conversations, even if their loved ones are obviously their loved ones are past, but have conversations in these visualizations that we do to heal that past, to really have that conversation, living or dead, with a person in the energy, is to heal it so then you can move forward, so you can figure out what your legacy is. But that past life stuff is really interesting because you know that there's been something passed down and you can't figure out where it's come from. And so what we do together is to really go backwards in time and heal it. There's a lot of healing work that comes with it, so then you can move forward. So it is a lot of legacy work without naming it legacy. It's like healing the past so you can move forward with your present.
But so let's, name it something else, but it's the important point, right? A spiritual ambassador. I mean, you're an ambassador for the genetics, for the emotions, for the way a family operates. You operate the spiritual ambassador. Like taking this role really seriously out of a place of love. And when you do let things go, like when you're working with your clients, it's coming from a place of love, not anger, right? You're moving towards, not running away from. And that's a big shift. I spent so much of my time after my dad died, took his life, of running away from, right? As opposed to moving towards. And it's an energetic shift. It's a practical shift. It changes everything. It could be the same mission, but it's a totally different mission.
Very true. Yeah.
So, that's kind of, I think, our thoughts on legacy and what it means to receive the legacy. And then maybe tomorrow, again, we'll shift, don't quote us on this, but we'll probably shift into what does it mean to bestow a legacy.
Right. So tune in tomorrow for the Soul Experience at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And we do a combination of what you've experienced here, a discussion, but also some coven intentions and prayer and opening with song and just really creating a sacred space, a sanctuary for you. That's really part of the leg of Soul Centered, is to create a sanctuary, a community of souls that are interested in supporting each other in centering themselves. So we look forward to having you tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m.
And Sunday at 9:30. Why it's 9:30, not 9, I don't know, but 9:30 a.m. on Sunday Mountain Time for the Father's Day Legacy Alive experience, focused exclusively on honoring our fathers, carving out some space to do this work. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Salam, shalom.
Namaste.
Peace.